So with the inner child model, what do clinicians look for? Well, first and foremost, what we're looking for, what are hidden pain points? I'll go into this more with you in a little while, but hidden pain points, things that occurred years ago in the past. What are the emotional drivers? What are those emotional triggers? And again, I understand there are visual triggers, there are environmental triggers, there are many other types of triggers. I believe emotional triggers are the most powerful. I believe they are the most powerful. We have to identify what those are. Because again, what we're doing, we're giving our clients an advantage. We're giving them an edge for it. Also finding out what is a client, what are they running from, or what are they running to? And in some cases, it may be both, running from and to. What is it that they're really seeking here? And finally, and this is really important also, is the negative self-talk. A lot of times we don't get into in depth with that with them, and we need to. Need to understand, how do they see themselves? Because those are barriers to recovery. Those are major barriers to recovery. So these are the things with the inner child model that we are looking for, right? But it all begins with understanding your inner child and knowing and realizing that emotion, thoughts, and behaviors are influenced by childhood wounds. And now if you're sitting here and you're just saying, I have a disconnect, I promise you I will connect the dots as we go through with all of it. There are two common forms of suffering that a child goes through. The most common are trauma and neglect. Somebody asked me the other day, really, what's the difference between trauma and neglect? And I just, to put it simply, I say trauma is when you get something you didn't deserve to have, some type of abuse. Neglect is when you don't get something that you deserved or needed to have. So I think, to me, that's the easiest way of differentiating between those two. Gabor Mate, many of you I know are very familiar with him, and he had the new book out a couple years ago, The Myth of Normal. And as I read it, because I've always been fascinated by his work, he gave a definition of trauma that just, blew my mind. I just thought it was just, perfect, perfect. I just want to share with you what he had. And what he talked about is trauma is not what happened to you. So that kind of stopped you and said, what do you mean not what happened? Okay. A woman gets raped, all right? That's the trauma, right? Your child dies of an overdose. The trauma. Trauma is what happens inside of you because of what happened to you. Trauma is not the event that inflicted the wound. So trauma is not the sexual abuse. Trauma is not the war. Trauma is not the abandonment. Trauma is not the inability of your parent to see you for who you were. Instead, trauma is the wound that you sustain as a result of whatever that event was. So now, and this is where he describes his story, which is very similar to mine. It's like, so my wound wasn't that my mother gave me away temporarily to a stranger when I was a child. My wound and what I made it mean, I wasn't lovable, okay, wasn't wanted, and I was abandoned. If trauma is the wound, if it is the event or the circumstance that happened to you, guess what? It never unhappens. I know unhappen is not a word, but he uses it, and I think it works really, really well. But if trauma is the wound that occurs inside of you that you continue to carry, that trauma can be healed at any time. I just think this is very profound. I think it is very accurate extremely accurate in what we make things to mean. And I would go back into the story here. He was born in World War II as a Jew over in Europe, and his mother had to give him away, get him out of the country so that he did not, wind up being in a concentration camp when around age 2 or 3. For me, when I was 5, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. My mother had a nervous breakdown. It happened in the evening, and I'm asleep. I don't know anything going on. My mom calls all these relatives because there's 4 of us, and I'm number 3, and I'm 5 years old. And what happened is these relatives come and they take us, okay? Because my mother, like you said, she's having a breakdown here. So I wake up the next morning and I'm in a strange bed, a strange place. I don't know who these people, I don't know who these relatives were. I've never met them before. Or if I had met them, I just don't remember them. And here I am, and I stay with them for a year, and nobody really talking to me. All they're telling me basically, and I mean talking to me about what happened, they're basically just saying, mommy's sick, daddy's sick, and you have to stay here. That's it. That's all I'm getting. And I was there for almost a year before I went back. What it meant to me was the people who love you are not dependable, and the people who love you will leave you. What that led to for myself was as I started dating at 15, 16, I couldn't date one girl. I needed more. I didn't know why. I just needed. My friends were like, "Oh, you're just a player, blah, blah, blah." It's like, and anyway, so that's what I did. And I did it throughout until I was almost 40. And it cost me a couple marriages, really hurt a lot of people along the way until finally I said, I can't do this anymore. This is crazy. And back in the 80s, early 80s, there wasn't, sex addiction was just starting to be known. Patrick Carnes was doing his work. I went to a psychologist and she told her my story and what was going on. And, after a few sessions, she said to me, she goes, you know what? You have an attachment disorder. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, lady. Because, as I said, this is a second career for me. It's a God thing. I was in marketing and advertising for many years. Um, and she explained to me, she goes, you're an avoidant. So you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of every relationship. You can't bond fully because there's a fear that you will get hurt, that you will be abandoned. And it's like the light went on. I needed to understand why. And with that, as I continued to do the rest of my other work, that was the catalyst that turned around everything for me. And after that, I met my current wife, and we've been together 28 years. When actually July 4th, we'll be married for 26. And I've been faithful the whole time. Shouldn't have to brag about that, but it's the truth. And why? And why? Because why? I found out why. And that empowered me to make substantial changes in my life. And I've seen this now with the inner child model over the last 6 years. I've seen the changes that have made, including people throughout the globe that are using it. Doesn't mean that the inner child model is the only thing we use. No, we have to also have the other components of recovery as part of it. But I think this is a really is essential need that is required.